My name is Dean Millot. I'm the managing partner for K-12 at Good Harbor Partners. And basically my firm works with education entrepreneurs who are trying to get the next step. We work with them to try to get a higher valuation for their firm than they might otherwise get, help them to take the actions necessary to get that valuation and then go to their financing event. That's it sort of for me. Today, what we're going to be talking about in this session is the challenges of selling into K-12. And I'd like to basically break this up into two sessions. The first session was going to be basically the buy side, the problems that are looked at from the standpoint of a school district or schools that are trying to buy products and services like those of you who are in the education technology arena would like to sell. And we will then take 10 minutes to have questions and answers about that side, and then we'll go over to the sell side and talk to the problem or the challenge, or I should say the response to the challenge that has been adopted by at least two entrepreneurs. And then again, we'll go into a 10-minute period. So we're going to start with John Antonucci, who is the superintendent at Westwood Public Schools. And he's going to walk us through sort of a very high level of sort of start to finish what it takes for a school district to try to purchase a set of services or goods. And we'll move from there. I'll introduce people as we proceed through the session. John.
Thank you very much, Dean, and thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. Just a quick bit about Westwood. We're a suburban school district about 15 miles southwest of Boston, just to give you a perspective of where I work. I do want to spend my time discussing my district's purchasing process and what a typical sales cycle might look like in a K-12 environment. And as many of you know, it can be long and maybe frustrating. I'd say that depending on the size and scope of a project, one could expect a typical sales cycle to be anywhere from a couple of months to a couple of years. And that's the outer limit and probably the exception. And that would be for a major initiative, something like implementing a one-to-one computing model or maybe a large-scale SIMS system. So because of that, I think it's really important also to look at the why. You know, why is it sometimes challenging? Why is it frustrating to sell in the K-12 space? And it's a bit ironic because I think as a business operation, schools like mine are fairly nimble. That is, if we want to purchase something, we can usually do it fairly quickly. But the issues related to selling to schools and the resulting sales cycle, I think are less about the technical side of things, and they're more about the fact that a lot of these initiatives and new technologies are about change. And if you were here for the keynote earlier, Seth Reynolds alluded to this quite a bit. We're talking about new technologies, but we're also talking about changing habits and changing minds, and that causes great stress in organizations. One of the questions for this panel was, what does it take for the school district to purchase something? And I think there are two keys to a successful sales in schools. And I may be stating the obvious, but I think the first is your company's ability to leverage personal relationships. But the challenge I see is figuring out in schools who are the decision makers and who's going to be the person to get that ball rolling. And depending on the product or service, it often involves a very long list of stakeholders. So the question is, how do you connect with the right people up front, and how do you get in the door? And since we're here at a technology conference, in my opinion, that person in a district like mine is our technology director. I'll say that many companies try to jump right to the top of the chain of command, and I get that. Very few people in schools, I read this in a book recently, they say very few people in schools are actually authorized to say yes. In fact, most people are authorized just to say no. But a phone call or a mass email or even general outreach to superintendents or even business managers, it's going to typically result in a dead end. Just kind of the honest truth. And it's something I think it's important for you to consider. So making the personal connection with the tech director, whether it be a phone call, setting up a face-to-face meeting. In today's environment, it could be a Google Hangout or a video chat. If you make time for that, I think it's a real investment and hopefully will result in a better business relationship. That said, the second key, I think maybe the most important key to a successful sale is your company's ability to articulate your value proposition. And I don't think a lot of companies do this well in schools. The question is, why should I choose your product? Why should I choose you over the competition? There's a lot of companies out there. And it's not easy. School administrators really aren't trained in business, typically. They don't look at return on investment like people do in industry. They're very reluctant to invest in things unless they believe it's really going to have an impact in the classroom and increase student achievement or provide some relief to teachers. So to the extent that you can convey that, the better. And I'm actually getting tapped, so I'll stop there and turn it over to the next person.
This is kind of like speed dating, but hopefully we'll get enough information out on the table so we can have some good grounds for questions. The next step is Nicole O'Brien, and Nicole is the technology lead in the Newton Public Schools. And so she can kind of look at this maybe more from the, the in the trenches problem that the district faces. Go ahead, please, Nicole.
I do want to piggyback on what John said about building personal relationships. It's really hard to get in the door with schools if you don't have a personal relationship with somebody. It's great to connect with lead teachers even who might be movers and shakers in the district who are well respected with their peers. Newton's a little bit of a larger district than Westwood. We have 21 schools, and it takes a lot longer to get things processed in general. John said he can get stuff done in sometimes under a month. In Newton, I guess if it's really high priority, you can, but I think the sales cycle at a larger district tends to take a lot longer, and there's a lot more red tape to go through and more processes. Another thing that I found is helpful when working with the larger districts is to start small. I think piloting something with a small group of people and making sure that they're trained well on it helps with increasing the adoption and integration, and will probably increase the likelihood of considering purchasing on a larger scale.
Great. So we've looked at the districts from sort of the top and the bottom. The other market or sub-market that people think about is, well, why not charter schools? That must be an easier case. Jed, Lippard is the principal, right? Principal at the Prospect Hill Academy Charter School. Tell us how this is different or the same for charter schools.
I won't speak for charter schools writ large, although I will speak for Prospect Hill Academy, which is actually one of the larger charter schools in the state. We're K-12. We serve about 1,200 students in 2 different cities, 3 campuses, and 4 buildings. And I think that the piece that I would add is that the idea to implementation gap in a charter school is a lot shorter than in a larger bureaucratic setting. If we have a good idea and we want to make it happen, we do. And certainly we are subject to public procurement laws and all of the requirements that go with being a publicly funded entity. But we can actually make a purchase in 2 weeks if we'd like to. And the decision-making process is a lot shorter, and the locus of control is really at the level of the school. What I would say is 2 things. One is charter schools by definition are mission-driven, and I think it's really important that you know your audience. So rather than making a mass appeal based on the product, it's really important that you align the appeal with the mission, vision, values, and strategic priorities of that particular school. And I agree that in most cases they're going to implicate student achievement outcomes and instructional practices primarily. So really important that you know who you're talking to and that you study that school's specific needs. And then the second thing is, what do you need? In my context, every cause needs a champion. And I agree that it's typically not the person at the top of the organizational chart that's going to be the champion of a particular technology product. It's generally going to be a power user, and in my case, that's going to be a teacher. And typically what happens is that there is in some cases, implementation needs to precede buy-in. and buy-in follows successful implementation. But I think what we've seen is that when we have power users who are very savvy with technology integration at the classroom level, their peers, their colleagues, start watching and wondering what's going on in that classroom that's having a positive effect on student learning. And from there, it becomes a cause. And so find those champions. The last thing that I'll say, and this is just really important, I think it's very important in your marketing strategies that you don't sell technology as the solution. Schools don't exist for the purpose of technology. Technology is a tool, it's a strategy to improve student learning and to improve instruction in service of student learning. Great technology isn't going to make a lousy teacher better. And I'd rather have a brilliant teacher in a classroom with 30 kids in a bunker with a stick and some sand than I would a lousy teacher with 8 kids in a classroom with a smartboard. So really important that you make sure that you're not selling technology for technology's sake.
Great. So, we've put some ideas on the table. Try to create 10 minutes. We can ask questions. So have some real dialogue. Ball's in your court. Questions? Comments? Man in the back.
How much time are you willing to try out a pilot if that's where you're at, and how do you assess some of the risks that you may encounter when you're trying out a pilot for a product?
It's a good question. I don't want to say it depends on the product, but I mean, schools, for better or for worse, tend to work in school year cycles. So I would say, you know, you could honestly give something a solid year's try, and you know, during that year, naturally, you're assessing its effectiveness. I think, but beyond that, it's you know, it's probably troubling. If you haven't decided to make the investment after year one, you probably won't. Anything, I mean, I guess you could do less than that, but it's hard, you know. Once you sort of start up a school year, and then on the end of the school year, you know, conclude the school year, those are very busy times. And so there's this is like the sweet spot right now in schools where people are really focused on what they're doing in the classroom. My point being that if you try to do something for 3 or 4 months, you're probably not going to see the value in that pilot.
Yes, actually, just pardon the question, but I'm not sure we're all familiar with the other 2 individuals at the table. If I could
Oh.
briefly.
The other 2 individuals at the table are on the sell side. They're going to speak in the next few minutes. This is the session, subsession, if you will, on the buy side.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you,
So,
the red shirt.
Thank you. You said that the technology person is usually the one to go for ed tech products, but what if the product is content-based? What I've heard is it is on it's on a web platform and it is technology, but I've heard that in many districts and schools, the tech person is dealing with hardware and not going to make a decision on a database, let's say, that's a web platform.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, and I would say I hope that's changing, and I see that changing. My technology director, we sort of rebranded him. He's a former teacher and department head. His title is Director of Technology, Learning, and Innovation. He is one of my key central office administrators. We literally sit next to each other, superintendent, assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, and this gentleman, Director of Technology and Instruction. So to your point, though, there are still several technology directors still who are dealing with the nuts and bolts on a more regular basis. So then you sort of need to look at the curriculum director or assistant superintendent. They're really going to be a go-to person. Again, I hope that's changing. I see it changing in districts.
Actually, I'm going to jump in, even though Dean didn't say I could. I have a content-based solution that our company does, and what I've seen is Westwood is where a lot of districts are moving, where you'll have someone with a title like that or instructional technology. That's probably the right person to go to. If that person doesn't exist, you're right. It's probably someone who's worried about wires and computers. Then you're probably going to have to go to someone in the curriculum department.
Nicole, do you have anything to add to that from your vantage point?
In Newton, we have a team of curriculum coordinators, and they work pretty closely with the deputy superintendent for curriculum, and they make decisions with the technology team on larger purchases and things like that.
How much does the ROI, learning ROI to the students versus operational ROI to the university impact the decision to pilot or purchase a program?
We're not universities. We're in the K-12 sector, but the
In general, like the actual operational.
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, again, and I would bring it back to what are the strategic priorities of the organization. So we have, it's interesting, at Prospect Hill Academy, we tend to attract overachieving, workaholic, perfectionist teachers, which is a recipe for high turnover. So when you look at our strategic plan, we have our two top priorities are, one, close the achievement gap, and two, retain excellent teachers. And those are warring with each other. So it's both, because if there are solutions that allow for greater sustainability in the work for adults, they talk about work-life balance a lot, and in turn, simultaneously are serving student achievement outcomes, it's a win-win proposition, which is why I think it's important that you know the school context very specifically.
Can I just quick follow up on that? And I don't want this to sound critical, but my guess is that most school administrators, especially in the content areas, don't know what ROI is. And so I alluded to it earlier, but we tend not to think in traditional ROI terms. Again, you're looking at student outcomes.
I'm talking more about philanthropic ROI. So impact, return what does the impact have on the students versus the impact have on the operations?
Yeah, I would say, generally speaking, the great majority of educators who are looking to make a purchase are only focused on student outcomes. There are some products naturally that contribute to operational efficiency, but the successful, in my opinion, the successful companies can prove to a school that their student outcomes will improve.
Lady in white.
Yeah, hi. This is a question for all three of you. So there's a big trend or shift towards this one-to-one laptop/iPad initiatives in schools. Are your schools sort of embracing that? Every kid has his or her own device that the school purchases through funds. Do you see that changing, that kind of trend changing the way you sell to schools, or other entrepreneurs sell to schools, or what's your sense about that?
Speaking for my district, we are going to a one-to-one model next year. We have been we kind of took our time. We let other folks. We kind of learned from their mistakes, if you will. We decided to go with the Google Chromebooks, and I'm a big Mac guy. I'm a believer. I think we all have Mac products, but someone from Apple said it well, which is, if you're going the Mac direction, you know, you're or the iPad, you're kind of betting on apps, the future of apps. If you're going in the Google Chromebook direction, you're betting on the cloud. You're betting on the future of the cloud. So, to answer your question, depending on your product, you know, starting next year, we'll have 1,000 students in the high school who only have access to the cloud. And so, again, if you're selling an app, we're not going to be buyers. But it's probably still, I'm making this up, but probably 80-20 folks are doing more the iPad or a traditional laptop initiative.
Jed, you want to add anything to that?
Very quickly, we're not looking at a one-on-one computing relationship short term. It's in our 3 to 5 year plan, and it speaks to the point earlier that I don't think personally, and we feel strongly, sort of as a community, that there are, in the sort of hierarchy of instructional needs, there are other priorities that are more pressing for us right now in terms of ensuring high-quality instruction across the board in every classroom for every kid every minute of every day, and adding one-on-one computing into the mix right now could be a distraction.
Newton, as far as I know, doesn't have any schools that are completely one-to-one. We have a lot of iPad carts and laptop carts, and we are implementing a lot more mobile devices. Some of the schools are using iPod touches and. Oh, okay. Well, I know we have a lot of devices, and actually, there's a lot of the students in the middle and the high schools, and even in the upper grades in elementary, are bringing their own devices too. So. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I've sort of weighted everything on this side. Is there one last question on that side? Gentleman over on the far right.
Given the difficulty of kind of selling into schools, a lot of smaller kind of ed tech companies have adopted the model of the direct-to-consumer to try and work your way into the school from the bottom up rather than from the top down. I was just hoping maybe you guys could comment on that, whether you see that as being effective or, just your thoughts.
Well, no, that's a great, actually, it's a very good segue. And we actually are at the end of the 10-minute questions for the first segment. Let's move into the second segment. You've been faced with this particular kind of a market and its complexities. How have you addressed it? And we'll start with Andrew Joseph, TenMarks Education.
Hi, TenMarks is an online math platform. We actually started in Newton, about half a mile from my house, and we have an office here and one in San Francisco. We have our system being used by about 20 to 30,000 schools across the country right now, so we've had a pretty broad perspective. And I know Jordan and he and I were talking earlier, we have very different sales models because our products are very different. So there is no one answer to selling to a school district, whether it's the technology person, the superintendent, curriculum people, teachers. But the key is knowing what we call internally the product market fit. So what is your product doing for the person that's using it, whether it's the teacher, students, administrators, other people in the system, and understanding what are their motivations and needs and what job are you helping them get done to, if you're a curricular product or something being used in the classroom, at the end of the day, it's all about outcomes, right? How do we drive outcomes for the students? And you need to be able to point to that, and that's, sometimes a challenge for younger companies like mine and everyone else's here probably. And the other thing, which I heard here, which I agree with 100%, is really understanding the relationship, right? Although we're working with a large number of schools, our model from a sales perspective, to get into that, is what I would call highly bifurcated. We have a bottoms-up and a top-down model. We have a freemium model, so our math program can be used by any teacher in the country for free. And we have, I just looked it up this morning, so far this week we've had 2,500 teachers sign up for our free product. We have a few million kids using our product for free. And then those teachers see that there are other features, right? And so we get on average, so far this school year, we've had about 2,200 to 2,300 inbound requests for information or pricing or other stuff to indicate there's an interest in our premium model. And we have a telesales model where people reach back out to that teacher. It may be a principal, a superintendent, a curriculum person who on the inbound side said, hey, I'm interested in this. On the other side, which is purely relationship-based, what we've learned is selling at a systemic level, it is purely relationship-based. And we, quite frankly, stunk at it for the first couple of years. We would go to the curriculum person or whatever, and we would get caught in that 12, 18 longer month sales cycle because we didn't have the relationships and everything. And so what we've done over the last year, part of it was getting the product market fit right so that we were actually relevant to a superintendent or the chief academic officer or someone else like that. And then once we realized we were there, and it's only been this school year we've been doing it, we have advisors who have relationships with superintendents, chief state officers or whatever, and we won't even go into a school district unless they ask us to come, or we have a warm introduction where a decision maker says, hey, that does sound interesting to me, I'd like to learn more. And we find that that is significantly more effective than trying to call up John and leave a voicemail on the superintendent's email, phone, because we're not going to get a call back. There may be 20 math companies trying to call him up and get information.
Jordan Meranus, co-founder of Ellevation, Bats Cleanup.
This is actually really fun because almost everything Andrew said, we do differently. And I think for you all, it gives a sense of a couple different options and some more context for some questions. So he says he goes either kind of top down or bottom up. We go in at the middle. We're a software company. We develop a platform exclusively focused on English language learners and the educators that serve them. There is, and this is kind of an important point for us, it's a massive pain point. Huge increase in the number of English language learners, huge achievement gap, very few tools. So there's not 20 products. There's actually basically nothing that is exactly like what we're doing. And so we've got kind of the pain point identified. There's a couple of other really important items here. In the kind of English language learner context, there is revenue, Title III, and other sources of money that has to be spent on these students specifically. There's also a person that is tied to that. So we wouldn't actually go to the technology person, and we wouldn't go to a teacher. We'd go directly to the ELL coordinator, who's the person that we need to build the relationship with. So kind of knowing who you need to speak with, who you need to develop the relationship with. We actually can cold call them because we kind of understand a lot of what they're dealing with, and then we're very consultative and kind of asking, we tend not to tell anyone all that much about what we do until we learn a lot more about kind of where their struggles are and what they're challenged by. I think the dollar amount makes a big difference. The freemium model is kind of one way to look at this. There are other companies that are represented here that have very significant dollar amounts tied to them. We're kind of in the middle. It's for the last year, we were about a $5,000 or $6,000 average price point for an entire district. And so that means a ELL coordinator can actually make that decision reasonably easily, often without having to go to the superintendent or the Board of Education. That works very well for us. So you're seeing some differences here in the way in which we do things and the way in which TenMarks does it for very different reasons, because we have different products with different decision makers. Let me just hit on a couple of other things, maybe to kind of spark a little bit more in the way of conversation. We talked a little bit about outcomes versus productivity. I think it's a little bit, I'm certainly not disagreeing with the people who are making these decisions, including the superintendent on this, but I don't think it's as black and white as perhaps even Seth said earlier. I do think if you can help with productivity in a way that frees educators up to be far more focused on preparation and instruction, that is the kind of other direction and important point to articulate. So we do that. We gave a huge presentation yesterday in the Midwest. About 15 people in the district were there. There was one thing that we said we do. It's a very small thing, but you can do it in about 5 minutes. One educator there had spent, she said, 8 straight days working on that because she has a class list of 200 English language learners that she has to do it for. That saves her so much time that she can then kind of repurpose, if done right, on preparation and instruction. So I would just kind of put those both out there together. I think it's critical that professional development and coaching be part of whatever anyone is doing. We have a software product. It's actually pretty easy to use and intuitive. We will not continue to serve those districts over time because of turnover and other things if we're not also figuring out how to serve them well, provide help desk support, have people who've walked in their shoes providing that support. And then third, we will not sell and close a sale unless both kind of the ELL coordinator and someone from their technology team is involved, as long as the district's of a certain size. Because if there isn't that relationship, we're kind of get stuck, and no one's going to be happy, and it doesn't serve anyone well. So I'll leave it there.
Great. We're right on time. In fact, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Does anybody on the school side want to comment on anything that was said on the company side before we open it up to questions?
Can I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
About just the procurement issue? I don't want to spend much time at all on procurement per se, but what I would strongly encourage folks to do is familiarize yourselves with the procurement laws in whatever state you're dealing with, because that is probably the number one issue as it relates to long sales cycles. I can only speak for Massachusetts, which is a law called Chapter 30B, but depending on the size of the contract, now $5,000 wouldn't be a problem. Above $25,000, it's going to trigger the requirements to do an RFP or a sealed bid, and it's painful and it's fairly bureaucratic and very time consuming. The other thing I'll say is Massachusetts, if you're an approved vendor, we call it the state bid list in Massachusetts. If you're on that list, it means I can pick up the phone and purchase from you without having to go through the other procurement requirements. It makes companies very attractive to work with. I believe strongly that it gives companies a competitive advantage because from an efficiency standpoint and a resource standpoint, it saves us time in the operations sort of division, if you will. So I just wanted to make that point.
I just want to add to what Jordan said about the importance of consideration of the implications for professional development. The world's greatest technology product without the adequate support for the adult learners is not going to go anywhere. And so just in terms of point of entry, it occurs to me that it would be helpful in any system to find who are the leaders of adult learning. At Prospect Hill Academy, our whole approach to professional development is through this cycle of collaborative inquiry where teams of teachers systematically look at data to identify where their instructional moves are and are not effective. Then they sort of assess the impact. They design plans together, implement those plans, assess impact of that. And then in that cycle, they realize, here's what we don't know. Here's what we don't know how to do. And it's in that space that technology can really make a difference. It's where, rather than the traditional model of somebody stands up in front of an auditorium of teachers, all of whom are grading their papers and begrudging the fact that they have to be there, just like we differentiate instruction for kids, we try to differentiate our adult learning for our teachers based on what the apparent needs are and the emerging needs. So if you can find, we have our curriculum coordinators, our K-6 and 7, 12 math and literacy leaders are the ones who facilitate those teams. And those are the individuals who know the most about where each team could benefit from technology solutions.
Great. So let's open it up for questions again. I'm going to start on the right, this side of the room, because I prejudiced the other side of the room. Gentleman here.
Yeah, actually, it just kind of goes off of Jed, what you were just saying. I was curious as to how much you're relying on these tech companies, this is for all the schools really, but how much you're relying on the tech companies providing these products for the training of the actual tech products too, versus having teachers pursue advanced degrees or full master's programs to learn about the techniques of integrating technology into the classroom. I'm just curious because I come from, I feel like, a unique perspective. I work for Lesley University, and we offer a variety of technology programs that help teachers integrate technology into the classroom. And I'd be curious to know if you're looking at for the products to the tech companies to provide that training as opposed to higher ed institutions.
I think it's a both and, not an either or. The complexities of teaching in 2013 are massive. And it's this conversation about what is the domain of teacher preparation versus what is the domain of the school site it's a very active debate right now because given the demographics of the students that we serve, there are just additional requirements that teachers are accountable to. English language learners being the most recent development in Massachusetts in terms of all teachers, regardless of whether you're in Westwood or Pittsfield or Boston, have to be trained. So, the question becomes then, where's their capacity for learning? And I really believe that in any school context, you need people who lead with different lenses. So you're going to want your power technology people who are really knowledgeable about, versed in, trained in technology as the leading sort of lens that they wear. Just like you're going to want people who are really focused on family engagement, just like you're going to want people who are focused on English language learners. And I think it's important that technology be a tool at the higher ed level. I mean, back in the day, teachers were taught how to use transparencies, really, as a class in teacher preparation. And we've evolved from that point. So I think a teacher would be incapable of meeting the needs of children in the 21st century if they didn't have some level of technology proficiency. I don't think everybody has to be an expert, personally. I think it's important that there be a critical mass of experts in the buildings and that there be a culture of dissemination and collaboration.
Anybody else have a comment on that? The lady with the sweater, blue sweater, tied around.
Thank you. My question is in the actual selling, for lack of a better word, of professional development, especially if you are the manufacturer of a software program or a hardware. Are you adding that in to the cost of the product, or are you doing a separate line item for professional development? Because, and I guess I'd like to hear from schools as well, but that's to you.
We do a separate line item. We sell an annual software subscription, and in year one, a essentially required, either in-person or depending on the size of the district, online training and coaching requirement. So year one, the dollar amount will be higher than in successive years when that training is not required. Yet there's still, by the way, training that goes with the annual subscription cost, but the in-person kind of day-long training, get someone there, really run through how things work, answer all questions, is a year one requirement, separate line item.
It's a requirement, so they can't buy the technology without taking that line item?
Basically, no one has kind of insisted that they not be trained. We would probably walk away from the opportunity. It would be the amount of time we would spend as they called us trying to find certain things would diminish the impact and the margins on the sale. And so I don't want to say absolutely, but just about absolutely.
For us, it's a little different. The answer to your question is yes. We have training bundled in with the annual subscription to our program, which is all web-based. There are a lot of online tools, and most schools do it via the web. For some of the bigger things that we're working on with specific deployments that have unique needs, we do custom training where we'll come in and we'll do stuff right on the ground, butts in seats, so to speak. But those are custom offerings that we bill for separately, but our standard training for a, quotes, normal deployment is all web-based.
We have heard this debate over and over again, and we are looking at the two sides of it, the buying side and also the absorption of technology side. And if you look at all the speech which are made about how bad the U.S. education has become, it's number 16, the K-12 education gone down, and we have to compete with the rest of the world. The world is flat now. What is, each one of you have comment on it, why U.S. education, especially in K-12, is considered going down and down, although we are putting so much money into it?
I'm not going to answer that. That's a different session, so I'm going to put that on hold. Gentleman in the back was raising his hand right in the middle.
Yep. I want to kind of go back to that ROI question, but from a different perspective. I'm curious for startups or even larger size companies, what degree of comfort or any does research come into play in your purchasing decisions? I know that there's very few startups that can afford full-scale research at this point or get grants to be able to do that. And there's actually very little research really that's been done on a lot of these products that are coming your way. And I'm curious, as buyers of these products, what level of, would that, if somebody were to invest in that at an early stage and be able to come to the table with something that had some legitimate backbone, is that going to affect your decision?
Would you prefer districts or?
Districts to start, and then yeah.
It's a good question. I've never really thought this through, but research certainly can't hurt, right? I mean, educators love research. They love the fact that it's a tried and true product or service. But that being said, I don't think it's a deal breaker if a company came to us and didn't have any, peer-reviewed research that they could stand by. Honestly, I don't even think it's a conversation that I'm sure I've had it, but I can't really picture a time where it's been a yes or no because of that. But certainly it can't hurt. I mean, people love to see success stories.
I mean, my response to that is there's a sort of movement towards evidence-based, right? And question is what constitutes evidence? So, for a new product, it's going to be hard to show longitudinal impact, but we will reference check and talk to peer schools, even if the sort of lifespan on use is short. There's within the charter community, there's healthy competition, friendly competition, and we're always looking at what each other are doing. And before I were to buy something, if I knew that another high-achieving charter school were using it, most important to me is the conversation with people at that school around both the intended and the unintended consequences of the rollout. But evidence is important.
I'm the moderator, not a panelist, but you should come and talk to me after that. Over here. Yes, you looking behind you.
So for the entrepreneurs, you talked about how many schools you're in around the country. It's a very impressive number. I'm in a startup, and just starting this fall, we're doing pilot studies with 2 schools. And I was wondering if you could talk about your experiences in how quickly you were able to move up from your first pilot study up to the 20,000 schools, and what were your strategies? Did you start out with pilot studies and then leverage that research to get word of mouth to other schools? And you talk about that scaling up to many schools.
And please do that in a minute.
Sure. We didn't start out with studies. We started out providing a product that we thought added value for the students and the teachers, and quite frankly had no offering whatsoever for administrators. And then as we started to get more traction, understood where the value was, we did some small studies. But I agree, most schools are looking for who, like me, uses this and says that it adds value. And quite often when someone says to me, we have a policy that says we only do buy stuff that has, a randomly controlled trial, blah, blah, blah. Usually that's someone who's enabled to say no, not yes.
I think you're also asking just about pilots in particular. We don't do pilots. And I think I think very early on, there's value. I think you've got to quickly move from kind of demonstrating value to getting people, at least in the non-freemium world, to pay for things. The more you give it away, the harder it is ultimately to price, and also to kind of get people invested in kind of working with you over the long term. That skin in the game, I know it's a kind of concept talked about often, is actually really important. We also require some integration on the technology side. It's very hard to pilot that. It has to be part of a longer term commitment. I know you've got to do it early, but I think you've got to figure out what it is you're looking for. And then one of the hardest things that you'll do is ask people to pay for it. It's a risk, but if you're good and the product adds value, people will.
Well, folks, it's 4:45. It's the end of the session officially. I know that these panel members are going to be around. You can ask some questions and pigeonhole them and maybe use one of your little tickets and give them a drink to give you an answer or something along those lines. Before you leave, I would like to point out that one of the things that my firm does is it provides us a weekly report to our clients on RFPs. And if anybody's interested in having a look at that, come down and give me your card, and I'll make sure you get it. Let's thank the panel for their good work.